And hello, everyone. Welcome back. Come on in, share it, like, comment. It is your favorite autism podcast. We're the number one autism podcast in the United States, depending on who you talk to. And as long as you don't check any of the charts. Okay. It is Ask an Autism Mom podcast on the Touching You Network. And I am Sister Rochelle, and this is Dr. Yolanda McKinney.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Thank you for coming in. Now, last month we talked about evaluations and the importance of evaluations, okay? And we had a great conversation about that. This month, we are talking about medical diagnosis and how it affects or works with your educational placement in the public school system.
Absolutely.
Now, full disclosure, I am in Texas, and Dr. Yolanda, you are in Delaware, okay? So if anybody knows anything, Texas is its own country, okay? Even with us doing research about this, we both found out that there's some terms that we use in Texas no one else uses.
Yes, true. So we probably need to clarify that when we get to that point in tonight's
Yes. So please understand, we're going to be as general and as broad as we can. Howsoever, if you have specific questions, okay, you absolutely can reach out to us at askanautismmompod@gmail.com. If we don't have the answers because we are not in your state or even in your district, if we are in your state, we do have the connections to reach out to people to get you the guidance and the help that you need. Okay. So with that, we are talking about we've already talked about what a medical diagnosis is. So, Dr. Yolanda, my friend Yolanda, can you kind of give us like an overview of what educational placement is? Like when I'm talking about placement, am I talking about grade level? Am I talking about who their teacher is, their homeroom? What are we talking about when we say educational placement?
Right. So first, I think we need to distinguish between medical diagnosis and then educational services with an IEP, right? So you can have a medical diagnosis. You can have a medical diagnosis, but when it comes time to talk about schools and individualized education plans, we call those IEP. That is universal, right? IEP.
Yes.
And LRE, which is least restrictive environment. We're always talking about how your child's disability interacts with or how your child's disability affects the way they access the curriculum. And so when we're talking about school, although your child may have a medical diagnosis, that is not our focus in schools. In schools, we are working to determine how that either precludes or kind of hinders your child's ability to access the education. And so we have these, and we'll talk about this more later. We have these meetings, right, that help us to determine that. So first, let me just ground us in some scripture, right? Always want to ground us in some scripture. James 1:5 says, if any of us lacks wisdom, we should ask God, who gives us generously without finding fault. So it's okay to ask for wisdom, and then it'll be given to you. So we're navigating all these special education places and spaces. We need to make sure that we operate in wisdom. So a medical diagnosis comes from a medical professional.
Okay.
Pediatrician, a psychologist, a neurologist. In my case, we had a neurologist, right? That diagnosis opens the door to therapy service, insurance coverage, supports, all the things, right? But then when it comes over to education, again, how do those things impact our son or daughter's access or how they can access the curriculum?
Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing is they're two very different things,
Yes.
but one can affect or we're looking at how does the medical
Yes.
interact with the educational side.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think that's very important. I
Yes.
had to learn that when I first got into the whole entire public school system. I know for my boys, I was like, I have the medical records. What do
Mhm.
you mean we need another evaluation?
Yes.
Howsoever, it had to be explained to me the school is providing supports, accommodations, even modifications, not for, I don't know how to put this, like lifelong, so how it affects them lifelong. It's how is this going to affect them learning phonics?
Right.
How is it going to affect them learning base tens when they're doing math? The
Right.
parts of speech. Like how is this diagnosis going
Yeah.
to affect this over here?
Right. Because remember, the ultimate goal is for all of our kids to be educated again in the LRE, the least restrictive environment that will allow them, right, to gain the most out of their education. Right. Our
Right.
goal is always, as educators, is always to make sure that kids achieve at their highest maximum level with as much time as they can with their developmentally appropriate peers. That is our goal. And the
Mhm.
only way we can do that is if we have an education professional, because we do have school psychologists, right?
Right.
They are psychologists, but they also have a background in education, and that's how they're
Okay.
trained. And
Okay.
so they are able to take that information and say, okay, your son or daughter has this diagnosis, so perhaps we will need to put in X, Y, and Z in order for them
Right.
to be successful.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. I'm staying with you. I'm staying with you. I love how you break things down. It helps me because sometimes I need things broken down into
Well,
small
and
pieces.
when you go and lots of times, and you said something that was very key earlier. You said, "Well, I've got the diagnosis, right? I've got the
Right.
paper." So when I go to the doctor is going to look at the DSM, and I don't know whether we're on 4, 5, or 10. So forgive me. They're
Yeah.
they're going to. I mean, I just don't know anymore. They're going to determine, does your child meet the medical criteria for the diagnosis of autism, the
Okay.
medical things, right? Do they have trouble interacting with their peers? Do they line everything up? Are they
Mhm.
right? They're going to have all the markers.
Okay.
But schools ask, does the disability impact their education?
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because there
Right.
could be kids with autism, Rochelle, that don't need any supports. They just rocking and rolling.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
So we're
Very
going to
true.
ask that question, and that is very important for parents to understand. It is not that we don't want to acknowledge that your child has autism. That is not the case. That is
Okay.
just not our focus. Our
Yes.
focus is on how is this going to impact the education, and what supports do the school, need to put into place to make sure that Yolanda's kid, Rochelle's kid, is able to access the curriculum and to
Right.
reach their full potential. The full,
Right. Right.
all caps, underlined, circled, highlighted, their full potential.
Their full potential.
Right.
Okay, I get it. So let's get a little bit deeper into it.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the medical diagnosis,
Mhm.
like you said, okay,
Mhm.
so we're looking at it. It's coming from, like you said, the pediatrician and all those things, right?
Mhm.
So kind of like what you were saying, I'll add in my little razzle dazzle of some scripture as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Because we know that getting outside help and asking, especially at the school, sometimes it can feel real scary. It can feel real overwhelming because, in a way, I'm saying my child is different.
Mhm.
Because one thing here in America, almost everybody experience is that school system in some way where you're basically measured up against your peers.
Right.
And then if there's any doubts, if you ever had any doubts that you were your child was missing milestones, oh, it becomes glaring. once
Yes.
you get into that school system and you're like, oh, okay, you know.
Yes.
Um, and the scripture that I have, it says is Psalms 139:14.
Okay.
It says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Um, our what we have to remember when we're getting these medical diagnoses, and we're going into asking the schools to help
Yes.
their educational process, right? We have to remember that it's not diminishing their worth, and it doesn't make you a bad parent. It
I,
didn't mean that you didn't read to them enough when they were when they were in vitro. You know, you didn't play enough Bach
right.
and and
Yeah.
Mozart for them. You
Right.
know, that's not what it is. Okay, what we're doing is in the school system, they're trying to identify the support needs,
Yes.
like you said, not their value.
Right.
So whether your child, when we get into the least restrictive environment,
Hmm.
needs a high level of support or a low level of support, there's no autism supremacy, if you will. There's no autism hierarchy
Right.
of support.
Although I feel like, Rochelle, that is starting to creep into the community, and I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah,
Right? Level 1 autism, level 2. Like, I see these posts and these conversations, and I'm not sure. And maybe it's
right,
because my son's an adult now, and so I'm on
right,
an old language regimen or whatever. But I
right,
feel like I'm hearing so many different tiers, and it just concerns me.
right,
Even within the community, it's starting to feel a little bit like, well, you don't understand because your kid this or you like, and I feel like that
right.
unity is starting to kind of spread apart, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, it's something, if we talk about just for a second, the intersectionality that we understand as Black women, how we present in the world, right?
Right.
um that intersectionality that we have to bring into the autism community, so that we're not having, for lack of a better word, autism diaspora war. You know, you're not really autistic because you don't
Right.
X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Well, you're not really autistic because, or you are more autistic because you do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
There,
That
you
that
know,
to be concerning to me. And I
that
don't
it
right.
is.
And that's another conversation for another day. Right now, we're talking about medical diagnosis because
The
you
medical
and I can
diagnosis.
go. We can go.
Right. It is.
Yes.
But like I
Yes.
was saying, it's not the value of your child, the value of your parenting. And the key that we really want to get into is that the medical diagnosis, I had to learn this the hard way. The medical diagnosis does not equal automatic school services to the maximum level
It
at all times. Real quick, I'll talk about myself because I can't talk about nobody else but me.
Go ahead.
Okay. Um, after fighting to get my child, to get one of my boys' diagnoses medically,
Okay.
I came into that school. I said, "Oh, we don't have to do all this long evaluation stuff. No, no, no. Here's the paperwork cleared by the doctor. Go ahead. Tell me where my baby gonna be. Tell me what you're gonna do for my child." They're like, "Okay, this is wonderful, and we're going to look at this as we do what we do over here, and we still need you to give us time so that when we come back, and we're going to get into that, the IEPs, that's our
Mhm.
next thing that we're about to get into. When you get into that, it was very, very, I didn't understand the individualized part of individualized. I didn't understand the plan part of it either.
Mhm.
That this is a roadmap. An IEP was a roadmap.
And it is legally binding.
And it's
So
legally binding.
so on the education side, we have to be very sure, right? And we have to gather data before we make any decisions, right? And
Right.
that's the part that parents need to understand, right? That's
Right.
the part, right? And then when you're me and you're an educator and a parent, it gets a little tricky because
Right.
you know what has to be done, but in the end of the day, you're still a mom and it's still your kid, and you
Right.
want to, but we have to gather data. As educators, we have to gather data before we make decisions because, like you said, that document is a roadmap to
Yes.
how we're going to get our students to achieve and how we communicate that to you and to every adult who is going to be interacting with your child.
Yes. Oh,
Every
you're putting the information.
adult needs to understand the inner every adult. And that just doesn't go for our kiddos with autism.
Yeah.
Everybody, but I'm going to say especially with autism because of some of the way our kiddos present. Every
Right.
adult,
Right.
from the bus driver to the cafeteria line worker to everyone who is going to have an
Yeah.
interaction with my child, needs to understand. And so which is why we get data from a lot of different sources. And that does take time and it can be
Right.
frustrating. But I would offer to a parent that you would rather have us do that than the reverse.
That part. That is true. That is true. So when we're looking at that, going into that, because so that we can, before we get into the IEP, before you even get to the IEP, you got to get the educational eligibility, correct?
Yes,
Okay. So what does it so what does that look like? Is there a way that you can explain what that looks like, the eligibility?
so it is, again, it is a meeting, right?
Mhm.
Data is taken and then certain criteria has to be met
Right.
determine if your child is eligible to receive services, right? Does
Right.
your child's disability in any way prohibit them from accessing the general education, whatever that is? Like that
Right.
broad. I'm trying to keep it broad and not just to Delaware,
Right.
accessing the general education curriculum. To
Okay.
what extent? And
Right.
if in fact your kiddo with autism has no problems with educating, with accessing the curriculum, because it's all about being able to access
Mhm.
the curriculum. And they don't need my support. And
Well,
parents don't want to hear ineligible when they have a medical diagnosis.
yes. Yes. Yes.
They feel like
Yes.
those two are, opposite each other. How can my kid have this medical diagnosis but be
Right.
not eligible for education, for special education services? And that's the part that we're trying to hit home with you tonight. If you don't
Right.
remember anything else, remember that they are two different, they're looking through two different lenses. The doctor just wants to know, do they meet the criteria? The schools want to know, is this disability going to impact their education, their access to education?
Right.
That's
Right.
the big difference.
And keep in mind, like you said, because an IEP is a legally binding document, that means there are laws that must be followed. Now, it's something that I had to learn. This isn't just the school, the principal don't like my kid, the teacher don't
Federal.
like my kid.
It's federal.
It's a federal law.
It is.
It's called the IDEA.
Yes.
Okay. And there are actual, it's not just, how can I put this? It's not just any and every disability as well. There's categories. There's 13 categories for you to fit in
Yes, ma'am.
for disability. That there's 13 categories. And you can actually Google that if you want to look it up. IDEA.
Just like I
Um, yeah, just
no,
like
just like
idea.
idea, all caps.
All caps. Okay. And that will kind of give you a breakdown of what that is. But because it's a legal document, and from what Dr. Yolanda, from what I'm hearing you say, that even if your child meets the criteria, okay, you're saying that now we also have to see how does it impact their access to the education, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And
We also don't want to we also don't want to give the kids a crutch that they don't need, right? And that's hard for parents, right?
that,
We
that
don't want to we don't want to over service kids, and we don't want to under service kids, right? So
absolutely,
we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful.
absolutely, because with that, I ran into that too. Because something that we'll get into is that I wanted, if my son needed 60 minutes of speech, then I want him to get 60 minutes of OT too. And I want him to get that one-on-one aid, and I want him to have support in the cafeteria and at specials like PE, or I want from the moment he gets out my car to the moment you bring him back to me, all the supports. But is that really helping him in the long run?
Right.
Because also I knew that my son in kindergarten was able to spell the word Nickelodeon completely. He couldn't say it, but he could read it and he could spell it
Right.
out of letter blocks.
Right.
And
We
he understood.
communication before.
Right. And if he couldn't understand, if he ran out of enough ends, he just moved the Z sideways. So he had that ability.
Absolutely.
So I had to be told, Miss Kent,
Your baby
he
doesn't
does
need that.
not in reading.
Right.
Reading, he
It's not the
didn't.
Can we put some of those minutes into math, ma'am? Mom, can you let us do that? Can you
I,
let us be the education professionals and allow us to do that, please?
and I'm telling you right now, at that moment, I was no. But I was a problem parent before I learned. I grew. I grew. Another scripture that we have is Proverbs 31:8. It says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." Like we said last week when we were talking about evaluations and advocacy, it's not just necessary; it's biblical. What you're doing by trusting the school district, and I know right now saying trusting education is a wild thing to say, okay? But these people are not against you and your child. The majority, I would say 99.99% of educators want your child, even with a disability.
To be the best they can be. Yes, we do. We
Yes,
absolutely do.
yes, because it does not benefit them in any
Right,
way for your child to be lacking education wise.
right.
Okay, so if we start with that, um, so let's really get into the nitty gritty. Okay,
Okay.
um, and I know this is the part we just went into it. Okay, what is an IEP? Like, what really is it? I know we said that it's a legal binding document, but like, is this like, is my child's IEP going to be the same thing as Barbara's IEP? Ooh, Barbara's a very old name, so if you name your baby that, you know, but
Yeah.
but Johnny's IEP. Like, what is an IEP?
So technically, right, it is an individualized education program. And what you're going to learn as a parent of a child with different abilities is that there is a whole world of acronyms that you will become introduced to. So this one is a very important one. IEP stands for Individualized Education Program.
Okay.
And like Michelle said, it's a legally binding document. It outlines goals, the services, accommodations. But what I want you to know is that individualized means it is tailored to your child. It is not a one size fits all. It is
Okay.
a collaborative document that is created with an input from a team. That
Okay.
team consists of you, your child, because even if your child is unable to physically say what they need to say, you may think they're too young. I would
Right.
offer to you that you have them seated with you so that they are at
Okay.
least hearing. And I know that can be hard because sometimes results and things are shared in the meetings and you feel like, well, I don't want my kid to hear that. And that is certainly your prerogative as a parent. For me,
Okay.
I always had my child present at the IEP meeting because I
Okay.
wanted him to hear. Now, I didn't start probably 5th grade, I think. When he was younger than that, I didn't. And then as we began to do things, and I said, you know what, I need to at least have him here in the room.
Okay.
But that's important. It is not a document that the school says, here you go. This is what we think is good for your kid, and they hand it over, right?
Right. Right.
You should have input in developing your child's IEP. You should have input in
Yes.
developing your child's IEP. You, your child, and then there will be a team, normally a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the school nurse,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the psychologist, right?
Right.
Trust us on the education side that we'll have everybody we need
Yes.
around the table. And as a parent, if you think somebody's missing, like if you think that Miss Kent knows a lot about your child and she's not at the table, say, you know what, I'd really like us to schedule this meeting when Miss Kent's available. I'd really like to schedule this meeting when Dr. McKinney's available. She's had an opportunity. She knows my son, right? Whatever the case may be, it is a
Right.
very much a collaborative process to creating this document.
Okay. I like that. That it's a that you. I kept hearing you say it's a team.
Yes.
Parents and the children are an active part
Yes.
of the team. That it is individualized.
Mhm.
Um, and that parents do have a say on who's in the room. I think what I like to bring as a who's been on the parent side of
Yes.
the IEP table, um, if you don't understand something in the IEP, because sometimes it does become a lot of jargon,
Yes.
and and not to be funny,
Call
but
it edu-speak. I call it edu-speak.
yes, and sometimes the um the district psychiatrist or even this like I had to learn what a SLP was. She just kept saying SLP and I was like, "What is that?" Speech language pathologist. Hadn't a clue, but she just kept saying it and I'm like, "Well, what is this?"
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Um ask questions.
Do not leave until you are crystal clear.
Right. And this might again, I am Rochelle Kent, and what I say represents me and not Dr. Yolanda McKinney. Do not feel rushed as a parent. I have been in an IEP meeting before where I was told, look, we only got 30 minutes, so we need to go through this. Not my fault about your planning. This is an IEP meeting for my child. It would be beautiful if it only took 30 minutes. Some IEP meetings do only take 30 minutes,
Absolutely.
but some are going to need some more time. And
Well, and what I
so,
also want parents to know is that IEP meetings are held minimally once annually.
mm,
Minimally. However, if at any time you feel like as a parent that this IEP is no longer doing what it needs to do to support your child, you may in fact request a meeting.
absolutely. Absolutely. And real quick, um, the thing that we found out here in Texas, and it's only Texas, we call our IEP meetings ARDs. We call them ARDs.
I had no idea what that was. When I saw that and I said, "What, Rochelle, what is an ARD meaning?"
Yeah. 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 So that stands for and hold on, let me make sure that I say it right, because listen, I don't want to tell you wrong, and then you'll be like,
You said
well,
something about review, dismissal. I don't know what the A was.
yeah, the A is for admission. That means we're starting services. So usually that's the very first meeting that we've had to set up the initial IEP.
Okay.
Okay. Review review services. That
Okay.
goes to what to what my good sis Dr. Yolanda was talking about. A minimum of once a year. You will have a review, but you can have the review as many times as you need.
Can I say
Okay.
minimum? That is minimum. If you
Minimum.
feel like your child is making progress towards the educational goals that are outlined in the IP, if you feel like your child is not making adequate progress, let's just say you may not necessarily agree with the progress, but if
Mhm.
you have any qualms, then please have the meeting and let us
Correct.
explain why we feel like we're this close or 20% of the way or whatever the case may be. Have
Right.
a meeting. Ask the
Right.
question.
Right. And then the D in ARD for Texans is dismissal. That means, because this does happen,
Yes.
just because your child received an IEP in pre-K,
Yes.
kinder, first grade, does not mean they will require an IEP the entire rest of their educational
Right.
run.
And I think it's important, Rochelle, especially as parents, that we have to trust that our child is going to be okay without it. Because we're so used to your point earlier, we're so used to our child having supports and we always want them to have, but if in fact your child no longer needs that support, please let them grow. Please,
Oh, oh,
please allow them to grow.
yeah. I just saw another autism parent post that one of the struggles that they had when their child went to school is you don't realize how many accommodations and modifications you make in your child's everyday life.
Ooh,
You don't realize it when it's just you and them. Like I didn't realize we had like our own language.
girl,
So
yes.
so I
Especially when
understood
the child is nonverbal or limited verbal. I know
exactly.
every grunt, every moan, every action. And I know exactly, and I'm anticipating because we
Right.
don't have any surprise meltdowns. But all of those that's why it's important for that IEP to be collaborative because
Correct.
you can say, when you see my child doing X, Y, and Z, like I was able to tell people, my son does not like to be interrupted. Point blank, period. He does not like it. If you interrupt him, there's going to be a problem. So
Right.
let him finish. Even if it's taking him longer to get his sentences and formulate his words and figure out what he's doing, allow him to process and finish.
Yeah.
I did not realize that that was something we did at home, right?
Right.
Until we started getting these, reports from school and stuff. And I was like, oh, you interrupted him? Oh, I probably should have told you that, right? So, like,
Right. I know for one of my boys, I had to break it down to them. They were like, we just can't get them to count past 10. I said, who can't count past 10? This boy been counting not just past 10, but counting to 100 and beyond and in different languages. What do you mean? I had to let them know. Oh, once my child feels like he's done it for you once, he's not gonna do it again. He feel like I already showed you that I did it. Why you want me to do it again? So you got to put a break between. how many times you ask him to do the same thing. He gonna be like, why you give me a worksheet and everything is the answer 10? He don't care no more. He's done. And
Wow.
he's not gonna go any further
Wow.
because he felt like you were playing with him. It's it's
And to
it's
all of
things
my
like that.
educator friends who are watching, this is why you have to continue to include the parent in the conversation, because we can answer a lot of the things that you're struggling with and you are having challenges with. Call us,
Yeah.
communicate, ask us. 99% of the time, we know exactly what. And parents, please know that sometimes that's impossible to be done in a classroom with 30 kids. Like I
It is. Even if your child, we're about to get into the least restrictive environment.
Yes.
My one of my boys, he was in what some call a life class or a self-contained classroom
Yes.
where there was a smaller amount of children in it. There was like maybe 6 to 8 children in that classroom, and there was a teacher aide and a teacher. Howsoever, okay, um there were still things they weren't going to be able to do,
Right.
even with that, because even in that classroom, it was a mix of children who also had their own IEPs and
Yes.
different levels of needs.
Yes.
So, no, my son could not get all of this because one, he didn't need all of this. That was just me
That's the most important thing.
being
Because
the
if they
overprotective
need
parent.
it, let me just say this, if they require it to
Yes,
access the education, it
right,
is incumbent upon the school to
right.
figure it out,
Yeah, it is.
right?
It
That we
is.
have to figure it out. If that's what your child needs, we have to figure it out.
We got to figure it out somehow, some way. So let's get into the least restrictive environment. Some of you may have seen it as LRE.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's get into what that looks like, Yolanda. What does that look like? Because I know I've had some friends that pushed against their child being in a self-contained classroom or possibly a behavior unit, although their child was the one tipping over desk and throwing chairs. What do we what does LRE look like?
So technically it means your child is educated with their and I hate the word disabled, differently abled peers to the maximum extent appropriate,
Okay.
right? So I may want my kid in all the classes with all the but so I'll use my child as an example. Very strong in anything that had to do with reading. I think you and I have shared that.
Yes.
Anything to do with read, spell, history, all the things, we got it.
Right.
So this LRE is with all the other kids sitting in English and doing the thing. However, math required small group because
Okay.
we need more time, more individualized instruction, more one-on-one support. So it is to our goal as educators is always to make sure your child is with, and they call them typical. All those words just do something to my
Yeah.
with their typical peers or tier, kids who are in fifth grade on a fifth grade level, whatever
Mhm.
that means, to the best extent possible. And, as most appropriately as we can, maximum extent possible and appropriate. I probably should say appropriate, not
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
Maximum extent appropriate.
Appropriate.
Um, but it doesn't necessarily mean your kid is going to be in general education all the time or separate classroom. It just means
Right.
appropriate, right? What is going to work? And that's why it's key, right? That we try to make all the parts fit together, because what's most appropriate to make sure your child achieves at their maximum level. And to my own child's example, English, social studies, we good. But when it was math, yeah, we need a little more
Right.
intimacy, a little more support.
Right. Right. And so so the least restrictive environment from what I'm seeing could also, it's not all encompassing from like bell to bell, like opening bell. It could be, you
Yes.
know, this is something that they need to have, you know, higher level supports for,
Yes.
but when they go to the cafeteria, they're able to walk into the line with, you know, you know, Miss McGillicuddy's classroom and
Yeah.
get their milk and tray and sit down with everybody.
Yes.
Or it could be the inverse. They're they're in there, like you said, in the English class, taking notes, no issues. But however the anxiety arises
Yes.
for them in the cafeteria, they need somewhere else because, their executive function shuts down
Mhm.
in that space.
And we've created in my district, we've created quiet spaces for kids at lunch.
Wow, that's
Because, right,
wonderful.
we have a cafeteria off of the cafeteria, like a little space. Um, some kids eat with their school counselor, some eat with
Yeah,
a teacher. Some,
right.
right? Just if it causes too much, I remember I always had to know when there was going to be a fire drill, because the fire alarm would take Cameron to a whole different,
A
right?
whole
And
new
so
place.
there are just things you have to know
You
so that
just
the kid is able to participate to the maximum extent possible.
Right. And I think when we really get to the root of LRE, least restrictive environment, it's inclusion with the proper supports. It's
Absolutely.
not isolation. It
Right.
is it's not, we're going to put them in a closet. We're not going to,
Or in the back of the room with a worksheet
in
when
the
everybody
back of the
else is doing group work, and we're just gonna, stick Yolanda in the back and give her this sheet to color. And while everybody else is learning, she's just back here just kind of coloring.
Right, right. To kind of bring it kind of into like the church world, in case there are some youth workers watching, it would
Absolutely.
be that in Bible study, you may have some pictures to go along with the story that
Absolutely.
you're telling.
Absolutely.
So, and when you're asking questions, like, yeah, that child, that preteen or whatever, is in the junior high class. When you're asking some bigger questions of the, like we said, the typical children in that class, you might want to, so that you can involve the other children in that class, if you don't have a special needs ministry that's
Yes.
big and supported, you may want to ask them specifically about the pictures, you know, and what part of the story, you know, do they gather, so that they're a part of the conversation and they're not being ignored,
Right.
because it's about being inclusive in the community with proper supports, not
Absolutely.
being isolated,
And Bible
right?
study is not any different than a classroom. We're trying to educate our children about Christ and about his
Right.
love for them, right? Because they deserve to hear that same story of love that every other child hears.
Right. 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 So as we kind of get, going on into our hour, before we like really kind of finish up, I kind of want to get into like, what are some practical tips that we could kind of give these parents, because we really went over, what is the medical diagnosis. We went into why would your child might give receive services or not receive services. We touched on the IEP, the LREs, and the LMNOPs, all
Yeah.
of the okay,
Yes.
and the IDEAs, and I mean, we just threw out all the letters.
The
Okay.
ARD.
Yes, and okay, we gave you alphabet soup for the
All of
soul.
yes.
Okay,
For the
so
special education mom soul.
exactly, exactly. So some practical tips that we want to kind of give you If you have already gone through the process of, you've done the medical diagnosis, or maybe you haven't done the medical diagnosis, because that's also, medical diagnosis is not required for you to get evaluation for educational supports. So let me say that again. A medical diagnosis is not required for you to get evaluations for educational support. Okay, so
And I
let's keep that.
won't say that a third time, but I will say that in our community, that can be a challenge. We don't always have access to doctors. We don't
Right.
always have the co-pays. We don't
Correct.
always have the doctors in our community. We don't
Correct.
always have the transportation. And so we don't want any of those to be barriers to you getting the support that you need for your child.
Exactly, especially when it comes to their education, because
Yes,
I can almost speak with 100% certainty. Education is the great equalizer,
ma'am.
but lack of education can be the great stumbling block.
Yes, ma'am. Agreed.
So we want to make sure, especially in our communities where the data, because we talked about data, the data shows, because of different things, we won't get into all the reasons, there are areas where our children are lacking to their peers.
Yes.
Of other groups. We want to make sure that our children are getting what they need. And I'll just say this before we get into our tips. Our peers of other racial groups, cultures, they're making sure their babies get that. They're making sure their babies are getting the support. Whether
that's why
right.
we have this podcast. That's
right.
exactly why you and I both are passionate about making sure that our community is educated. Not to say that we are not anybody of any race, creed who can watch this podcast and be educated, but we are passionate about the underserved communities that also fall into this category, and making sure that you are knowledgeable so that your child can get the best education possible.
Because something that I want to get you is that the accommodation could be speech to text, because maybe your child, writing it doesn't always come out.
Yes.
Okay, because of handwriting, there is a bit of a disconnect. It doesn't mean that they don't understand. They need speech to text, and they could write you a whole novel speech to text. But if you tell them they have to write it by hand,
right? Or the opposite. My son is the writer,
right?
Which is much easier to him. Like, I wish I could show you some of my text messages from him, baby. Like, the writer,
right?
His preferred way of communicating,
right? It could be even just a calculator. Yes. During test, it could be something like that.
Extended time. They just need a little more time.
They need extended time. They do need printed out notes. They do need printed out notes. Okay? Because again, that connection of, just look at the board and write down what I put, it goes mumble jumbo in their brain. So keep in mind, accommodations aren't scary things.
No.
Sometimes I think we as parents think accommodations mean that our child is getting a different piece of paper than everybody else.
Think about right now, Rochelle, if somebody told you and I that we had to do this podcast without our glasses.
Listen, let me tell you something. If you see me on this podcast without my glasses, I have contacts in, or I have misplaced my glasses. Those are the two times you will see it.
Right? That would be like asking a kid to do, like, it helps me to see so that I can do what I need to do.
What you need to do.
Right.
So going into our practical tips, those were kind of tips, but kind of going into our practical tips. Okay. Provide the medical documentation if you have it. but understand that you do need to start the conversation with your school system or your educators. And that could be something as simple as an email, a written letter, something that you send and say, hey, I would like my child to be evaluated.
And put all your requests in writing. All.
Oh, yes.
All caps, lines, circled, highlighted. All.
Please, please, because a gentleman's agreement is wonderful, but keep in mind these teachers. Okay. But these teachers, I was only a paraprofessional. The amount of meetings that I had from the moment the kids came to the school to the moment I went home at the end of the day, me remembering that I told you, sure, I'll make sure they have their lunchbox today when they go home. That, that's not an IEP thing, but it's just human nature. There's so much going on.
So much going on.
So please put it in writing.
And don't take it personally if the educator forgets. There are, to your point, I could have a class of 15, and if 5 of those lovely children have an individualized education program and I'm learning everybody's accommodations and I'm trying to keep it all straight, please give me some grace and know that I am trying. If you put it in writing, that helps me.
Right. That we also have, you want to be able to ask, how does your child's disability impact their access to the curriculum?
Yes,
okay.
You need to know that answer.
You need to know that, because an example, I grew up with a young lady. She said she had cerebral palsy. One of the accommodations, I didn't know that as a child, was she was able to have a computer and she typed everything. We all thought it was so cool because, it's the 90s. It was a huge, thick laptop, but she had it and she could type everything. It was a word processor, if you will, not even a laptop. But in order for her to properly access the curriculum, she needed that.
Yes.
And so, and the only way that she was able to get that is if her caregivers, her parents were like, hey, how can my child show you that they understand this?
That part. And just because our children are nonverbal does not mean they can't communicate.
Ooh.
So however your child communicates with you, please share that so that the school will know that. I think I shared with you, Rochelle, that we had like 3 sets of the magnet letters on our refrigerator. And that's how we communicated with our son. He would write us, we would write him, we would talk. So we communicated before there was anything verbal ever. Find a way. He used pictures, the pics. It made sentences like and learn your rights. Tip number. Learn your rights, parents. Know the law and know what you're entitled to. Study it and learn it. All the acronyms that you heard about today, know them.
Yeah.
Start with IDEA, IDEA. Start there because that's the federal law that governs everything we do in schools concerning children with disabilities. Start with the law.
Start with the law. And as you're going there, unfortunately, there are a lot of scammers online right now. People who have no background in education.
Right.
No background in and disability law.
Yes.
And they are charging people hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's correct.
As consultants. They have advocates. They have their own podcast where they are telling people some horrendously wrong things. Keep in mind, just the same way that the IEP is individualized, each situation is different. There's no catch-all.
Right.
On it. So when we say do your research, go to the actual government websites of these federal laws. Okay? Go to your state's education board Yeah, here in Texas, it's the TEA. They have a whole section on their website about disability. And then if you do find a group online, do your research. Find out who is this group? When did it start? I'm not saying any group that started in 2026 is not a legitimate group. Howsoever, there are some groups that have been there that are the reason why we have IDA because they were the group that fought for us to get it. So
Right. And
just
feel free to check people's credentials. I don't mind you checking mine. I know Rochelle doesn't mind you checking hers. We're moms, but we're also very knowledgeable and just felt very much led
yes.
to do what we're doing. And we
All
want
right.
to make sure you have the facts, right? So, Proverbs 24:3 says, by wisdom, a house is built. By wisdom, a house is built.
Yes.
So we're just here trying to build your understanding so that
Yeah,
you can continue to build and support your children. That's what we're here for.
absolutely. And so as we come to our close, I want you just to remember that medical diagnosis and educational eligibility are connected, but they're not the same.
And how are they different?
Because the diagnosis opens up the medical doors,
Yes.
like you said, on the insurance and even things that you can get provided by the state and the federal government for your child. But the
Yes.
education eligibility opens up the school supports.
And as educators, we are looking for.
We are looking for the impact. We are
Yeah.
looking for the impact. Look at me. I be listening. I be listening. I be listening. Sometimes, my brain, but I be listening. It don't look like it, but I do. I do. So before we end, my dear friend Yolanda, can I ask you just to say a prayer for those who are going into their IEP or their ARD meetings for the first time or the 15th time?
Yeah.
And so that they have the strength, the knowledge, and the bravery to advocate for their child properly.
Absolutely. God, we thank you for this opportunity to share our learned and our lived experiences. We thank you for every parent, every caregiver, every friend who is listening. We ask that you give them stamina. We ask that you continue to bring clarity and give them courage as they continue to advocate for their children, as they go into this initial IEP meeting or ARD meeting, as they go into the 10th one, the 15th one, the 20th one. God, give them what they need. Let their children be surrounded with supporting, caring, and knowledgeable individuals. We thank you for the wisdom that only comes from you, and we thank you for this opportunity to share our learned and lived experiences. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for joining in with us. We are looking and reaching out to other people for us to interview. Some of you might know my boys go to an amazing barber who has a nonprofit organization where he does sensory cuts. We're trying to get him on the pod. He's very, very busy cutting
Yep.
our baby's hairs, but we're trying to get him on the pod. We're trying to get other autism parents, moms
Yes.
and dads, on the pod as well. And if you have any questions or topic suggestions, please send them to askanautismmompod@gmail.com. We will be here again on the third Tuesday of March. I had to look over at the calendar. I was like, what month
Believe it,
are we?
March. That is crazy.
I know it's crazy. And we will be here to answer your questions and give you support. We love you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Also, follow us on your social media.
Yes.
You can usually find me at Mom Jumps the Spectrum. That's me. If you look, it's Mom Jumps the Spectrum and IG and Threads. And Dr. Yolanda McKinney, she's doing other podcasts all over. I'll share her with other people. But where can we find you?
You can find me right here on Facebook, Yolanda McKinney. You can find me, my ministry, the Gate Ministries, right here on Facebook. And then my Instagram is Y_Mac, MACK. I'd love to hear from you.
All right. You got all the ways to find us and talk to us. All right. We'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
Good night, everybody.